So by na hada kontos the mahadi shu umukwiti we na hada God. Thou art a great and almighty God. For you teach the way that no man knows, and you direct the way that no man can go. And in every way that you have said unto me, we have returned all of the lights that were given to the world and to man, and that was taken away from the children back into you. For every light of God that is within you carry the mysteries of God that are not yet known and those that are to be known, and they carry the mights and powers of God that the children had lost. And the children could no longer remember how is it that they were able to communicate with your God, because they had no light in them. And the children of God walk in darkness because the lights of God went out in them. And without light, they couldn't see the way to know the way to return back to their godlike selves. In teaching and preaching, we gave you to show them the way to come to the true knowledge of who they are and how their God is, so that they will come to the full understanding of the nature of God and the way in which God exists, not only in them, but in the world. For there are many that are lost in this world, never knowing that in every way they were stranded in the lower valley. They didn't find a way to come up higher. They couldn't find a way because God showed them that everywhere they were anchored in this lower dimension, they could not find a way to vibrate that they may come up to a higher dimension. There are many things that God wanted all of mankind to know, and that was that when they were in the image and likeness of God, they carried everything that was of God that was in them. And like God, they could do anything and they could do everything, because like God, nothing was impossible for them to do. God also wanted them to know that, like you, everything in this world belongs to them. For God created everything and given it free to everyone, so that in all the ways that man may come into this world and see all things in this world, he must know that these are the free will gifts of God unto them. We have given unto you everything that is of this world that was created by us, because we have willed everything to you. And in all the ways that man knoweth not that all that he sees and all that he possesses belongs to God, and that God has willed it to you, no man knows how it is that you walk in the way of man and show man that in the way of God they did not know that nothing here belongs to them, and that God has given it unto you. And these things could not have been known to men, because a man violated every sacred and divine laws of God. He started to steal the things of God. Men started to covet the things of God. And every way that man went further and further into these evil ways, he was no longer able to recognize that God gave it nothing to be owned. And every man that says, I own these things, so will God show man that God will take it away from man. We have always said to you that wherever we send you to do anything, it was a wisdom that was sent to many that they did not understand. that God's world is God's world and God's world alone. Everything that is in God's world belongs to God and God alone. And everything that belongs to God, it is God's to give to whomsoever God wishes it to be given to. And when many did not understand how God tests them in asking for the things of God, man did not know what God was saying to man. They all belong to God. And every way that man would have found it in his heart to give, God would show man that God would increase man exceedingly in every way that he would give. So that in every way the children of God came to be on earth, constructed earth, and created everything that was seen, God gave them dominion over everything. God said, all these things are yours to have. They are the free will gifts of God to you. And that is how the children started out. They started out knowing that every created thing that came from them, from the God within them, was given to them freely. And when God gave it freely to them, God wanted them to recognize the nature of God in them, so that in knowing how to give, they would learn the way that God works from within them. And God would have sent them in every way that they would go, so that in every way that the tribes of earth could have known nothing, God would have given to them who to give to, what to give to, and in what quantity to give it to. The story of the Good Samaritan is a story that God told everyone that still did not resonate with them. Because God works from a higher and sacred dimension, man was never able to understand the many stories that God told man, because man interpreted all the stories of God from the lower dimension. And except man waited for God to teach man to know how God speaks and what God means by what God says, man would not have been able to understand it. God told him that a good Samaritan on his journey found someone in need, took them to a place, instructed the owner to look after them, and that he would return to pay whatever it is that was owed to the protector. And that story ended. You know, man, ask your God, did the Good Samaritan return? And if he returned, how much did he pay to the owner that was given to tend to the needy? And God deliberately left the story like that because God wanted man to question what really happened. And when man would have started to question it, he might have come to understand that there was a deeper meaning to the whole story. The Good Samaritan represents the way in which God taught man that wherever he would go forth in the goodness and love of God, and would find any man in any way that needs to be uplifted, always ensure that wherever you take them, that they are always going to be well taken care of. The Good Samaritan did not return because he to whom the needy was presented also knew that in all the ways that he must work in the love and the goodness of God, he would ensure that all that would be given, that would be received, would be given freely. so that in every way that God wanted man to know how he can be the Good Samaritan, God wanted man to know wherever you go in this world and find there who are needy, lift them up in the ways of God and go forth in all the ways that God sent you. That wherever God would give to you to find and to uplift, you would always know the way that others would act in the goodness and love of God, in the upliftment of man and the upliftment of God in man. And these things were not known because man did not interpret what God gave to man in the higher dimensions of God's giving ways. All over the world, God showed man that wherever man needed to help man, man demanded a price for it. And everywhere he demanded a price for it, he violated everything of God that was sacred and divine. And no man understood that in every way that he would go that way, God would increase the curses that came from the evil that he practiced back onto him and into him. And that every way that it would be in him, it would be passed on from generation to generation to generation. And so when we say to you, nothing has changed in the world, that is what we showed you. That this begat that and that begat that. What came from one went forth to the other generation, and from the other generation to the next generation. And so this whole cycle of evil was never broken. This whole cycle of darkness was never removed. And wherever man has gone in this world, God has shown man, he did not find the way to love in God and to do good in God, because he did not find the way to be the Good Samaritan. In the story of David and Goliath, God also showed the children. They didn't understand the story. For all of them said Goliath was a giant and David was a little boy. And God said, you didn't understand it. For when the children of God walked on earth, they walked tall in the majesty and the might and the power of God. So in that sense, they were giants. And when they were giants, it was because God showed them they could overcome anything, because they were mighty in the powers of God. David always represented the way in which God wanted the children to know that the lesser things of life carry the slings and arrows of life. And in every way that man goes into his head always becomes his weakest point. And because the children walked in the ways of their heart, they were always able to overcome the things of this world because they were great and mighty. And so in every way that the slings of David were unleashed upon the head of Goliath, it is the way that God showed all the children that everything that went to their heads brought them down. Everything that went to the head brought them down. For the head carries the satanic light in it. And no man understood the story. And the children did not understand the story. And so they didn't know why as giants they fell. And why it is after falling they were never able, like Humpty Dumpty, to be put together again. And so the children always walked in ignorance of all the things that God had given in the many stories God had told. Because God told the stories that reflected the way in which man walked before God and walked from light into darkness. In all the texts that man wrote, all the disciples were always the way of God showing man that in all the ways that man transgressed the laws of God, he walked always towards his own destruction. There are many that says, these people did not live. We see no records. And God said, because they are symbolic. They are symbolic. For God hid all the messages in symbols and gave it to man because God knew that in every way that it was addressed to man, man must know what God has given that he should know. God says, the beasts of the fields know these things. The reason they can't talk is because they can't tell man that we are the way we are because we did exactly what you were doing. And God gave them to remember, but never to speak. And so the beasts cannot tell man that everything that you are reading about constitutes the way you walk before your Almighty Mother and Father God, and all that which followed you as a consequence of walking away from the sacred and divine ways they had given to you. So God says, when you're teaching, you are really allowing the children to recognize that they know not the history of their beginning, nor did they know the way in which the end came. For when they did not know how many times they came here, nor how they left, it is because God showed them that they were broken in the way they broke the covenants of God, and they were disconnected from any continuity of their previous selves. There are many things that God wanted them to know, and you must tell them. You dream what you call dreams, God calls it visions. And God shows you every dream or vision you have is the way God reflected to you. That which is of you, that which you were, that which came from you in the many lives that you lived. And you could not connect it because you could not recognize yourself in the different selves that you were. And so many came here and did not understand that it is not your first time here, but it certainly is your last. And every way that you had been given visions, God showed them. All the ways they walked before God, all the things they did. And they didn't recognize that in all their visions, God took them in the different ways and the different dimensions in which they existed. And they couldn't tell anybody. That was me. Because God knew that they didn't know how God would give anything. Because God knows the way to show them that whenever they did not walk in the faith of God, they could not know the things that are precious unto God. Whenever God wanted them to know that the Spirit is mighty, God showed them the way that the Spirit projects from them. And they didn't know that they went nowhere. All that happened is that the Spirit reflected back to them. It's like sitting and looking at a camera movie. And the film already has the movie. And the movie is already reflected on the screen. But it can only be reflected on the screen because it's already within the camera. And everything God wanted the children to know. That's the way God said, everything outside of you is inside of you. Everything that you see happening outside happens within you. And when you have come to the true knowledge of yourself, you would have known that when you are a part of the greater part of you, you can then reflect yourself in any dimension that you wish to. And that was the way the children were gods. God said to you that when they came from the sun, came here, the children were able to dematerialize and reappear on the sun in their sun image and likeness, and then to dematerialize again and return to earth in this earth image. They couldn't remember any of these things because that which was great and mighty of them was taken out of them. And so the children had no knowledge of how it is that they were able to be gods, to ascend and descend between the celestial world and this earth valley. And so they lost everything. They could remember nothing. And they were never, ever able to be great again. You will teach them the way to greatness because we give you the way to know how greatness is. And in every way that you will walk, in all the many ways that we send you, so that you teach them the sacred and divine rituals of God that are given to restore back to them the protective armor of God. And in every way that they will be protected, they will be shielded from the wrath that God brings and the final desolation of man and his evil in this world.